Hello and good day, beautiful soul. This is the Angel Lady Terry Marie, and we have another amazing guest for you today. His name is TJ Woodward, and before we get into that, because I can already feel Spirit, his guides and my angels and whoever he connects with are already coming into the mix and sharing with us. And if we've not met yet, I'm the Angel Lady Terry Marie, an empath intuitive coach. And I help my clients to connect with their angels and spirit, get past their BS so they can follow their own purpose. TJ Woodward is a revolutionary recovery specialist, best-selling author, inspirational speaker, and an awakening coach who has helped countless people with his simple yet very effective methods. Okay, everybody's starting to rush into me. So, hello and welcome, handsome. So happy that you're here to join us today.
Well, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be in conversation with you. I can already tell this is going to be a rich and wonderful information together.
Absolutely. So please, if you would be so kind as to tell us a little bit about your journey. And did you always know that this is what you wanted to do?
Well, the short answer is yes and no.
Okay, stretch it out just a wee bit.
I remember being a very small child and being so happy and so joy-filled and so connected with the world. And I remember asking some of the deeper questions at a very young age, like, who created all this? What created all this? How is life so magnificent? Just looking at a blade of grass or at a butterfly and not even being able to comprehend what the order of the universe is. And I remember laying in my backyard as a little kid, looking up, at the sky and wondering how much life must be out there and how I felt connected with all of it. I also remember at a very young age, around the age 7, when I started to lose that, when I built a wall, when I afraid, when I started pushing all of that away. And basically I had started becoming programmed, by the ways of the world. And I was losing that innate sense of love and connection. So I walked around that way from age 7 until 13. I discovered drugs and alcohol. There was some relief from that. That only worked short term. And then I eventually, before my 21st birthday, ended up getting sober. That put me back on a spiritual path. So I didn't know that my calling was to be a spiritual teacher or to be a person in the world speaking about awakening until I was in my early 40s. It was late 30s, early 40s that I started having that inner voice telling me that there was something different for me, a different path. And of course, like many of us, I said no for a while. And then when I finally said yes, everything fell apart. So that's kind of the medium version of the story. It's that calling, I didn't say yes to it until my early 40s.
I understand that because when I was much younger, I turned everything off. I don't even remember what age I turned it off, but it was all off. What were some of you started to reconnect. Okay, they're giving me like mixed signals, like, okay, guys, one at a time, please. So you started to reconnect when you became sober around 21, which was, in some ways, it's kind of a short distraction on your path from recovery. I don't know, I don't profess to know an awful lot about it, but I was married at one time to a friend of Bill W.'s. And he had a much longer journey along that particular path. What was it that caused you or had you spark to stop that, your drug and alcohol addiction, as you're so generous to just be out there and share it with us? Thank you. What sparked you from that path back towards this one?
Well, I think that the way I'll answer that in this moment is I felt so spiritually bankrupt that last year was really a painful experience. it was no longer filled with relief or connection or love that I was getting from the substance. It was really more and more disconnection. And so I think I had abandoned my true nature to such a degree that I felt completely spiritually bankrupt. So I walked around that way. It was a very dark year for me. I mean, there were fun moments, but for the most part, it was pretty dark in terms of my feeling connected to myself and others. And so when it was, a friend of mine had gotten sober, and, through his path, I ended up connecting with a group of people that helped me to really reconnect with myself spiritually. And that was really the beginning. So, I mean, I think the deeper answer here is I was in so much pain for so long, for an entire year, feeling lost, feeling like I had my umbilical cord in my hand, trying to plug it into someone or something to feel whole again. And it was not until I got sober that I began to go back inward and go on this path of spiritual awakening, which, as you can hear, it had its ups and downs. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like I got sober and then all of a sudden, everything became really clear to me. There was a longer path there. But I recognized through that journey, and the reason I wrote my recent book, Conscious Recovery, is I look at addiction through the lens of spiritual wholeness, because what I recognized in the midst of all of that, there was still that spark of light within me that wanted desperately to shine. And so recovery for me has been a returning to that light and a way to express that light in the world.
I love that approach. It's not just an approach, I get that. It's a perspective, it's a wholeness. It's about bringing the broken or the bruised back into the light. Would that be fair?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, so many of the treatment modalities, I've been working full time in the addiction treatment field for a decade. And a lot of the modalities in the treatment world, and then also in other recovery circles, really look at addiction as the problem. And they also look at the addicted person as being broken in some way. So I'm coming in with a really different approach, only because it's profoundly effective. And it was my own experience. As I said, when I was really young and knowing my not light and knowing my love, and love is who I was, and that connection with the world, I knew that was still within me. And when I came out with Conscious Recovery and the Conscious Recovery method, I really started with a question. And that question was very simple. What if I would start looking at every single person I worked with through the lens of spiritual wholeness, not looking for what's wrong and how to fix it, but looking for what is whole and how to create a space for someone to return to that, as you so beautifully said.
Gosh. I love that.
Thank you.
I absolutely love that. You mentioned once you started to accept your spiritual path in the sense of doing this particular work, everything fell apart, which we wouldn't think would happen when we say yes to the calling, right? However, it often falls apart, and not just once. Unfortunately, it kind of like falls apart at a stage at a time. Would you be willing to share with us what that was like for you and how you got through it?
Yes, I would love to share that. It was the most excruciating experience of my life and the most liberating, because I had been on a path of outward focus one more time. My entire 30s was really back to this belief that something outside of me was going to make me feel whole and complete. Right. I had been sober for a long time, between 10 and 20 years during my 30s. And I had one more time tried to build my life from the outside in. I actually don't say this with any kind of judgment. It was exactly where I was intended to be at the time. But I was all about like building my business and getting the perfect partner and the perfect house and the perfect car and dressing a certain way. And all of that was exactly what I needed to do, because what happened for me is the more I did that, the more disconnected I felt. So it's really be, because I was doing that as a way to try to reconnect, but it was causing more and more emptiness. So one more time, it was like I was on this 20-year cycle. I was back to a place as I was nearing my 40th birthday, where I was emptier and emptier and emptier. And so the reason that I think it fell apart from me, and I don't know if it needs to for everyone, but a lot of people I know do have this experience, it's that everything that I had built in my egoic way needed to dissolve so that I could return to that spiritual place. Again, not right or wrong. It's just that a lot of ideas, perspectives, beliefs, and quite honestly, it was a lot of the fear I was coming from. All of that needed to collapse in a way, and you know, maybe gently settle for some people. For me, it was a pretty dramatic experience. I think that's one really tightly.
Yeah, my transition, as I call it, nearly 8 years ago, from being an executive administrative assistant working for a federal agency was anything but gentle. So yeah, I get it. And I think sometimes the harder it is, or the more abrupt it is, it's like there's no plan B. This is it. You've said yes, we got you, honey, and we ain't letting you go. I don't care what you do to the door. We're in it, and that's it. So yeah, you can do it kicking and screaming, or you can do it a little less dramatically.
Yeah, and that was really my experience, because like I said, I had said no to that calling for a while. It started as a little still voice, you know, that little, like, what about ministry? What about being a spiritual teacher? What about, you know, writing books? What about sharing your addiction and recovery path? And I said no for a while. And when I finally got clear that it was a yes and things began to crumble, I had been around, you know, spiritual teaching long enough to know that it was happening for my highest and best. So I was able to lean into that experience. I remember having an experience where I didn't leave my house for 72 hours. I didn't open the curtains for 72 hours because I was really going through a dark night of the soul. I was really willing to look at all my shadow, all the shame that I was holding, all the ideas of right and wrong about myself, about the world, all the stuff about childhood that I hadn't been able to let go of yet. And it was like there was this experience in that 72 hours where there was a point, just like you said, that I knew I was stepping through this threshold in a new and different way. And everything shifted for me in a really, really beautiful way. And I came out of that knowing absolutely that there was really, at that point, there was no turning back. It was definitely my calling. I said yes to it fully. And from that, I've been able to let go of all these beliefs of shame, all these ideas. It doesn't mean I no longer have an ego or the human experience. It just means I have a different relationship with that now. I no longer blame anyone, including myself, for my past. I'm able to be in a place now where I recognize that it's all been fertilizer for my transformation. So in that way, I'm grateful for all of it, including the belief that I was off my path during that whole decade in my 30s.
And had you not been off of your path, according to ego, right, you would not be able to as richly and fully help those who need it in the way that you're able to offer that option.
Yeah, that's the big thing. And I really appreciate you saying that, because I have come to a place where I have so much compassion for people on their path. I don't have judgment of any of us when we jump into our ego. You know, it happens. That's part of the awakening process. Seems to be remembering, seeming to forget, remembering, seeming to forget. And I love what Pema Chodron says. She says, compassion is not a relationship between the wounded and the healer. It's a relationship between two equals. And so when I really know, and then she goes on to say, when we know our own darkness well, we can be present with the darkness of another. Same for light. Yeah. I can be present now for people, no matter what they've done, no matter what's happened to them. And I can hold a space of non-judgment. I can hold a space of love, and I can hold a space of compassion. And that's something that no words can even really point to. But when someone can feel that, there's an opportunity for transformation.
There is. That brings up something that I think kind of crossed my mental path this morning or sometime today is that whether people in general, in recovery or not, whether they understand what energy is and what they feel, that's kind of like our calling card.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really fascinating the effect that presence has, and the effect of what I would call creating a space or holding a space for someone. When I start perceiving right or wrong, I start shifting a person's ability to heal, and heal's not even the right word because we know we're whole and perfect, but to recognize their deeper truth, whether that's working in the recovery world or in my, my ministry at Agape, wherever I'm called to be a presence for that, something really powerful happens when we can simply witness that. I remember early in my life, and I'm sure anyone watching right now might remember that one person that they just felt so accepted and loved by. There was no judgment. There was simply acceptance and allowance. And that created a shift. For me, that person was Mary Helen Brownell. She was my first spiritual teacher, and she held such a beautiful space for me while my ego mind was still catching up with the idea, what if I am whole and perfect? What if I am a perfect aspect of the one power and the one presence? That wasn't what I was taught, and that's not what I was believing at the time. But deep within me, there was that remembrance.
There's more than one, more than likely, but would you share one challenge or one obstacle? Because there is, correction, are people who are going to really resonate with this message that you're sharing, and maybe they want to be a recovery specialist as well, or they're trying to work through their own recovery to connect in some way with their wholeness. What one obstacle or challenge would you share with us, please, TJ, and how did you manage that?
Well, I think the biggest obstacle that I see, certainly it was true in my own life, the biggest obstacle for me was, well, there's two things that are coming through right now. One is a belief in my own ego. I believed that I was a separate self. And as long as I believed I was separate from you or separate from source energy, I suffered. That's true suffering. And I remember when I began to become aware, not just intellectually, but at a deeper level, an experiential level, that we're all one, there was a huge shift that happened. So one of the challenges was projection. I was believing all of my judgments about others. I didn't recognize it was simply a mirror of what I was believing about myself. The other obstacle, and the reason I'm bringing them together, is the other obstacle is not everybody is in a place where they want to support this path. There's a lot of energy out there that really wants to continue to believe in separation and fear, all the isms that come out of a belief in a separate self. And there's so much of that consciousness in our world. I am not one to think that we need to protect ourselves from that in any way or push that away, but to be in the midst of that and recognize that that's not the deeper truth. So the challenge for me at certain points, or the perceived obstacle for me at certain points, was finding people that were really on the path that could support this. So spiritual community, community of like-minded and hearted people on this path was so crucial to me. It was really, really important. So, the short, then, to sort of encapsulate the answer, there's a lot of static in the world. Turn on the news, there's a lot of static. There's a lot of this, programming about how the world is terrible and, we're all here and suffering and all of that. So unplugging from that, beginning to unlearn the programming, and then plugging in with communities that were, living in this different way. Those were the most important obstacles and solutions for me along the path, and really continue to be.
I totally agree with you. I don't listen to the news. I don't even know what radio stations are around me, really. I don't listen to any of those as well. Sometimes it's enough to manage my own vibration without detoxing from everybody else's, all that fear and whatnot. I'm getting a different something up here, so just bear with me for a moment. Thank you. How did you start off after that 72 hours of a total just reconnecting and letting go of as much as you possibly could, if not all of it? How did you start in or on this part of your path, TJ?
Well, that's interesting because I remember sometime around that time, it was challenging for me to be around particular energies. I remember like I would go to the gym to work out and I would have my music, and my music was my meditation music. And I thought, I can be in the midst of this and have it not affect me. But those energies were really difficult for me. People with a lot of intensity. That passed through, and I think it's interesting that this is what's coming through. I don't often talk about this. I think that was a stage when I needed to, or I believed I needed to kind of protect that part of myself a little bit. I really spent a lot of time in the silence. I spent a lot of time in intentional community. And there was some challenge around like the static, the social media posts, the intensity at the gym of, like pushing, that force energy, that like hyper male energy, if you will. And then there was a time where that subsided for me and I was able to be more in the world and not get as pulled by that. So now, that's not where I'm at, because, 99% of the time I'm okay with being in that energy, because maybe it's because I've connected enough or cultivated that relationship with the essential self enough that now it doesn't affect me as much. So I guess what I would say to anyone that's watching would be, wherever you're at, you're in the perfect place, and we can honor where we are in our path, right? If that's needing to spend time in the silence, if that's needing to not watch the news. I've gone through periods where I haven't watched at all, and then periods where I can watch and really send some love in the midst of that. And I just have to honor where I'm at any given moment with that.
We speak, we in general speak about honoring in the moment. I know what I teach my clients and I work with myself. Would you please share your perspective on that?
On being in the moment?
On honoring where you are, whatever that is, because if someone is in a place of trying to figure things out, or they're what I would call energy congestion, just totally fogged up here, and others who are coming out of the dark night of the soul, or just becoming sober, or whatever it is, whether they need to protect themselves and not watch anything or totally immerse in it, what advice or how would you help that one person who's watching, or the 20,000 at some point? What does that really mean? Honor where you are, honor being in the moment.
Well, I think there's a couple of things I want to say. First is a little bit of an explanation of what I mean by presence. I think it's different than what we consider being in the moment, right? Because time, as we've been taught, really isn't reality, right? That's an ego construct. Okay, the seconds are ticking away, and when we started this interview was a different time than we are now. But when we actually have these deeper experiences, we recognize there's only the eternal now. And the reason I say that is because when we get to that place, when I'm in that place, it's whatever's happening in the outer realm is okay. That's the deep mystical experience, partially because I recognize there's no other. So how could I possibly need to protect myself from someone when they're me anyway? Now having said that doesn't mean we're not on our path in a certain place where we might be in the process of discovering that, or maybe we woke up one day and we're feeling sensitive to those energies. I think the key is a couple of things. I'll go back to one point I already made. That's intentional community. It's a safe place to go and just let ourselves be authentic with where we're at. Someone that's going to understand this conversation, this awakening process. And then, you mentioned coaching, and I think that's really important too. I've always worked one-on-one with a spiritual counselor. I think that's really crucial because it's someplace where we can really be vulnerable and be authentic. it's such a paradox, right? All of this ego stuff, on one hand, we can say is not real at all, right? None of this is real, but that nothing could be truer and less useful in some moments, right? So having a place to be able to share that experience and just let it all out and let it be in an authentic way seems to be part of the awakening process. And again, it might happen in an instant, or it might take a lifetime of us continuing to remind ourselves of who we are. So I think community and having that one person to work with that can help guide us, both of those are really crucial, because in the end, can I really, and I don't love myself, I don't mean from that ego place, but like really recognize the deepest truth of who I am and surround myself with people that understand that and are vibrating at the same level. That's really what intensifies this experience.
I totally agree. And I love that you brought up working with someone, because most of us are taught we need to control our environment, control our feelings, watch what we say, to whom and when, and we have to manage ourselves at all times, otherwise we're a total failure. Well, a doctor who operates on him or herself is in a big world of hurt.
Yes.
Because there's the anesthesia part, and then there's the watching and all the rest of it. We, as a race or a entity, I guess, I don't know word, are so bent on doing everything by ourselves that we forget. It's like even giving Reiki to yourself. It's not as effective as having someone else so you can let go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also love that you talked about controlling the environment. There was a stage of my conscious awareness where I was moving out of the victim stance, and it was important for me to move in what I call magical thinking, which is that next phase where it's all about manifesting, and it is kind of about controlling the externals, and it's really fun. And then there's a point where it's like, oh, it's not really about that, because in the end, I think that's just a new form of suffering. Because my experience is when I'm trying to control the outer world, it's exhausting. When I am recognizing that I can be at peace and in love, being love in the world in the midst of absolutely anything, that's a game changer. That is where I can find peace no matter what. It reminds me of the Tibetan Buddhists that build the beautiful sand mandalas. They spend hours, days, I think even weeks building this beautiful work of art. And the moment it's finished, they sweep it all away, because the external world is impermanent. And I love that you also framed thoughts. Thoughts are really things that are just constantly going. I'm constantly having thoughts. What if I were to just view them through the observer? I don't need to change them, but just recognize, thank you, mind, you're doing your thing. I know it.
Yes. What's one of your favorite ways that you work with your clients?
I think one of the ways that is the most important thing for me and my clients. Now, this is if I'm working, I love working with a broad spectrum of people. Sometimes people coming out of an addiction, sometimes people newly sober, oftentimes people who have, kind of achieved everything in the outer realm, and then they're like, oh, now what? There's something deeper calling me. One of my favorite groups of people to work with are people that are also themselves spiritual teachers and coaches that are also up to some real big shifting happening and being a part of shifting the planet's consciousness. I love working with that group as well. The thing that's interesting is, regardless of who I'm working with, the key is present moment awareness and holding a space. You could say neutrality, but I don't really mean holding a space of neutrality. What I really mean is holding that deepest awareness that whatever they're telling me, whether our ego mind calls it good or bad, in the midst of that, love is who they are. And when that space gets created, first of all, it's so much easier. Because I used to think I had to have all the answers for my clients, and that was exhausting. I would have 5 clients in a row and be drained, and now I have clients and I feel energized and excited about life, because what I'm doing is holding a space that in the midst of anything they're sharing, there's always spiritual perfection at play, always, no matter what. And I'm there to hold that energy and hold that vibration so that we can resonate there more than where we are in our story.
That is so powerful. Simple, not always easy. And simple is not always easy. And people, I've been there. Where I say simple, okay, is it supposed to be easy? No, simple is not always easy. And easy isn't always simple. But if you can get to one of those pieces and just take the next step, whatever that is, then you're going to get on your path or continue on it much more deeply.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the key. And part of it is when I have the experience of what happens in such a profound way that wasn't me, the ego me that did it, it's so enriching and it's so valuable for myself and for the client and for whoever I'm sitting with, whether I'm facilitating a group or working with someone individually. There's something really powerful that happens, and that's so energizing that I could even say it becomes a little addictive, but it becomes very exciting, it becomes very energizing, it becomes very expansive. So when I'm living in the question with a client, meaning rather than coming up with answers, we're together exploring in this field, because there's this energy field, this potential, this field of potentiality. And when we're creating that together and stepping into that, it's really energizing. And it does become, my ego mind starts to say, oh, this is easier than I thought. It actually isn't all that complicated. But what it requires is me to do my own spiritual work. And spiritual work, what I mean is questioning all the beliefs and ideas, reminding myself, cultivating time in the silence, remembering who I am.
Absolutely. What one thing would you like, one more thing, you've shared so much, and I'm so grateful. I'm absolutely loving this. What one thing would you like to share with that one person or persons who are watching?
You know, it's interesting what just came up. I always trust it. What came up is to offer anyone watching right now a simple message, and that is, you are worthy of love. You are worthy of letting go of the story. You are worthy of forgiveness. You deserve a life filled with love and connection. So no matter what you've done or what's happened to you, whether we consider it to be extreme trauma or a life of feeling disconnected, whatever's happened, the past has no power over you when you're willing and able to recognize that you are able to now receive the love that you are. As Marianne Williamson said, who are we not to be talented, brilliant, gorgeous, and fabulous? That's a paraphrase. But when we let our own light shine, that naturally allows and encourages others to. So in closing, what I'll say is, you deserve that life. You are here as an individual expression, just like we all are, of that source energy. So my invitation is to find a place and a space where you can continue to cultivate that remembering.
Thank you. Please tell our viewers how they can find you.
Yes, tjwoodward.com. Very, very simple. That's where you'll find information about both my books, about any upcoming events I have, and a way for us to connect spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and physically. tjwoodward.com.
I like that. I use those words myself, all of those, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. It's really cool. Any social media connections that you'd like to mention, TJ?
It's all on the website, TJ
All on the
Woodward.
website. Okay. TJ Woodward.
Yes, thank you.
TJ Woodward. That's TJ WOODWARD.com. TJWoodward.com.
Yes.
Thank you so much, handsome. I hope that you'll come back at some point and we can take another dive into even more than we did today.
I would be delighted.
Thank you. And thank you, beautiful soul, for joining us for yet again another episode of Permission to Follow Your Inner GPS. It's all different, even if you're going to be or going into or already on the path of becoming a recovery specialist. You can see that it's all about you and your experiences, and we'd love to have you visit our Living Spirit and Wellness Global Directory to see who you would like to work with, just to see what's being offered there, and perhaps you'll join us and become part of a larger global community. That would be at angeldreamteam.com. Thank you for being with us.